Hi, I'm blah and I do blah.
Dang it. You're so literal.
um, I I am so you asked me before we started hitting record, you asked me to say I am blah and I do blah. And my mind immediately went to like there's so many ways to answer that question. Obviously I can say I am Noah Aronson and I do Jewish music, but I could also just say like I am a human being and I do breathing. I can say I am experiencing excitement in this moment and I am moving my body with that excitement. There's so many different ways that I think what one says after the words I am is really telling. And it's like really definitive and defining of their identity. Like I am a doctor, I am a rabbi, I am a mother, whatever those things are tends to lop onto our egos in a way. And so I can say I am Noah Aronson, which would say, okay, that's my family name and attached to my parents and their parents before them. Or I can say I'm Noah, which is more of like okay, I am your friend. I'm someone who knows you well and we've worked together. Or I could just say I am and then stop right there. And now I just am saying an expression of just I am experiencing life in this moment.
Can I ask, when you think about the fact that when we say I am and then something comes after that, do you think a lot of times whatever comes after that, I generally think it's like a default answer. The person is trying to anticipate, what are you asking me and what do you want me to say to you? It's kind of like when you ask someone, how are you feeling? And you go, I'm fine.
Right.
And chances are it's much deeper than that, but we just say, I'm fine. Do you think most people stop and process, or that the question invites processing? What is this person asking? What do I want to say? Who am I?
Right. I don't know if I could speak for most people, but I do think about that a lot in terms of the thing that comes after I am. And like, so when you say I am fine, I think like a more like a nuanced way of approaching it. Like obviously fine is not a very eloquent, expression of emotion, but like you could say like, I am experiencing joy in this moment, I am experiencing sadness or grief. I am experiencing this moment as this or that. And I think that then it kind of invites in a more dynamic conversation. But yeah, I think the average person is probably just trying to just kind of get through the conversation quickly and not go in depth so quickly. But
Okay, the fact that you started out with this question and it felt the way you thought about the question felt very embodied and very in this moment, thinking about how my body feels, what kind of emotions are going through, how do I want to process this question? I met you years ago, and so again, you were doing the music thing, and the one thing that I thought was different about you when you came to the synagogue and participated in the music was you did seem very in the moment with people. And a lot of musicians also I've seen them at all kinds of houses of worship, and they are excellent musicians. And of course, you are an excellent musician. But I think a lot of times the musicians struggle with balancing musicianship and wanting people to have a good musical experience and what it means to be a prayer leader and be there with the people leading them in communal prayer. And I just thought at that time, I thought you did a nice thing balancing that. But then in all the work I've seen after, I've seen even more thinking about your body and your place and your context. So could you tell me, in the years I saw you at Congregation B'nai Yehuda many years ago, but in the output I've seen from you in videos and podcasts and the kinds of things you're talking about, it doesn't seem now just music and spirituality. It also does seem wrapped up in what you're talking about, which is awareness of where I am right now in this moment, the body. Has body become a big focus for you?
yeah, I have I've discovered in my own spiritual practice that I think singing and music got me into a conversation of spirituality. But then I think that movement, exercise, dance, breath, has expanded that expression of like my connection to whatever is bigger than myself. And it allows me to more deeply get into myself and my self-reflection. And so, yeah, I've definitely put a lot of time and thought into not only just the singing and the music part, but also just what's happening in my body in that moment. That's helped me throughout all of my kind of self-reflection journey, the spiritual journey, whatever we want to call it. And I think you mentioned also just about like prayer leadership and prayer moments. I'm making less and less, I think, of a distinction between like, okay, this is a moment of prayer versus this is a moment that I'm sitting with kids on the floor just singing songs. Like, it doesn't matter if we've designated this time as, okay, now we're praying, and this time is now we're just hanging out. Like, it's all happening all the time. And so like, it doesn't need to be that like, okay, now I'm standing in front of the community and this is my role in this moment to be this. It's like, I'm always this, and I'm always a breathing body, or a spirit inside a breathing body. And I am just trying in every moment to be as present as I can with others and with the community.
But so I don't know, do you feel like an outsider in that view? Because my impression when I go out into the regular world, and the regular world is at the store, and the regular world is at schools, and the regular world is also at synagogue, where again, people are very much, they understand their roles. And you can see a rabbi's this way when the rabbi's just chatting with someone. And then when they go on, there is like a persona, there's a role they're fulfilling. And I resonate with what you're talking about, which is finding ways as you move through your journey in life, how can I be more myself in all these places and find out who I really am so that I'm the same person in all the places? How do you balance that against, these are the expectations of what we want you to do? And you can certainly see how other people feel like they very much have to balance, I need to be this way here and this way here and this way here.
Yeah, it's very hard. I think, like I said in the beginning, it's anything that is like an identifier on our ego is going to leave an imprint, whether it's rabbi, doctor, mother, whatever those identifiers are. And I think the more things we add on, the more easily it is to lose like that connection to true self and true like who I truly am. But it's hard. It's hard for people in roles of leadership, and I do see the value in in there being some sort of distinction between when people come to a rabbi's office and they're looking for that rabbi to fill a certain role, or they go to a doctor's office and the doctor has a certain role, so there is an important boundary there. And I was actually in rabbinical school for 2 years at one point, and I decided to leave rabbinical school. And one of the reasons, not all of the reasons, but one of the reasons was that I really just wanted to interact as Noah, being Noah. Like, I didn't want to be Rabbi Noah, or I didn't want there to be a distinction. Like, now I have to serve this role and do whatever someone else expects of me. I just wanted to be me, expressing whatever was needing to come through in that moment. And I was feeling a little bit of like that the boundaries were getting thicker and thicker as I kept going through school, and I wasn't wanting that sort of distinction.
That kind of perfectly leads me to the question I was going to use to kick off, but then this whole discussion was way more interesting than the opening question. And the big reason I wanted to talk to you is, I don't think I've ever heard like your origin story. When I met you, how did you wind up doing, going synagogue to synagogue, doing music? What was your journey that led you to that point? And then what, as you said now, you did experimentation with, I'm going to study deeper with Judaism. I'm considering a role in the rabbinate, and then decide that wasn't for you. What does that whole journey look like if you describe it?
Yeah. Well, obviously all of our journeys start, one could say it starts in birth, and then others can say it starts before we were even born. But like, I think the various different elements of my upbringing and my family are kind of what led me in the direction to choose the path that I had chosen. And in some ways, the path was like chosen for me because of the relationship that I had with everything. So my father, I grew up in New Jersey. My father was a cantor in a synagogue in New Jersey, and so And then for the listeners who don't know what a cantor is, the cantor is a clergy person in a congregation in a Jewish community that is mostly focuses on the role of music in spiritual life. And so I kind of grew up with a father who was a musician and a singer and an artist in many ways, but also a community leader. And so I spent a lot of time in synagogue. I went to a school called Solomon Schechter Day School, which is like a Jewish day school where we learn secular and Jewish studies simultaneously. And so I went through that through my 12 years of primary education. All the while, I was also discovering my love of music and movement and dance from an early age. I started playing piano when I was around 7 or 8 years old. My dad would play at the piano in our living room, and I would just look at him with such awe. I was so giddy. I'm like, how do you do that? You have to show me. And so he would sit me down and he would teach me a thing, and then I would learn it, and then the next day he would teach me a little bit more, and I was like a voracious learner. When it came to music, I just like ate it all up, and I played every single day of my childhood. And after a couple of years of that, I started taking lessons because my dad also had a job and a life. He couldn't be my piano teacher anymore. But I was starting to kind of advance past also where he was able to teach me. So he had me kind of take classical piano lessons and things like that. But yeah, in my early life, music was driving a lot, and I was playing piano for hours every day. I also learned from an early age that I loved to dance and to move, and so I pursued theater for a bit when I was in high school. I was a really shy child. I didn't speak a lot. I didn't use my words to express, and so music kind of became the place where I kind of express my emotions more. And it took a lot of convincing actually to get me to go on stage and try theater. But once I did it and got over that fear, I realized I loved being on stage and performing and singing and dancing and kind of entertaining in that way. And then I went to college, first at a place called Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania, and then I transferred to Berklee College of Music in Boston, where I continued to study piano and jazz composition. And while I was at at school, I took a part-time job at a synagogue outside of Boston, Massachusetts, called Temple Beth Elohim. And the cantor there, a woman named Cantor Jody Suffren, she actually, it just so happened that when she was in cantorial school, in the early 80s, my father was a teacher at that school. He was going in and teaching some classes at the cantorial school. And so she was a student in his class. When I came to do the part-time job, she kind of took me under her wing, and she was very became like a mentor to me. Over time, she started encouraging me to write music for the synagogue, which I had never really considered doing. The religious school director at the time decided to send me to a place called Havana Shira, which is like a Jewish song leaders retreat or a workshop.
Okay. A lot of guitars.
There was so many guitars. At the time, I started playing guitar when I was around 16 years old, but even so, guitar wasn't my primary instrument. Piano really was my instrument.
Right.
But when I got to Havana Shira, it was like 200 guitars, and everybody's playing the same chords and the same strum patterns, and I was like really blown away by that. But I remember a couple things hit me, and I was about 21 at the time. A couple things hit me very profoundly. One was just this sound of 200 or so people all singing together with so much passion and so much love. That was really meaningful to me. And also seeing people like Debbie Friedman and Craig Taubman and Dan Nichols, who I would still say are those three leaders were pivotal. And I kind of watched them in their style of leadership. And I was like, there's something in me that was like, I can do that. I saw that, I had never seen that style of leadership before that. Yeah. And there was something that just kind of lit up within me, especially with Craig Taubman. And I just was like, I knew I almost like I could see my future in a way when I watched him. I'm like, I can see myself doing something like that. The way that he
And is this
commanded.
retrospective thinking back to that moment, or can you literally, do you think you can
No,
kind of remember being that
I
young kid?
remember, yeah, I remember sitting there and he was teaching a setting of his Vishamru, which is a prayer, and he said it to music, and he was sitting in a small group. There was like 12 of us, and he was just sitting by the fireplace, just strumming along, teaching us how to sing the song, and I was like, wow, I just had this like out of body experience where I'm like, I will be that one day. I'm going to be doing that, you know, and so. Um, so yeah, he became like I had him and Dan Nichols especially the like in my mind watching them lead for years. I kind of followed them around, and I actually wound up being their accompanist for both of them, and many other artists, Josh Nelson, and I played for Debbie Friedman. I played for many of the big kind of Jewish music artists. I became their
Yeah.
pianist, and I would go around with them and play with them at different concerts and stuff, and kind of really watched and learned how they were able to kind of command a room and bring people into the experience. And so when I came back from that first year of Havana Shira, I was still a student at Berkeley, but I kind of asked the cantor to take on more responsibility at the synagogue. And so they were able to like just kind of load me up with lots of different, teaching opportunities. And I became the Friday night accompanist at the synagogue. I was like teaching bar mitzvah students and Torah cantillation. And I was like in the religious school with them, all the ages. I would have so much fun with like the kindergartners, first and second graders. It would draw crowds. Like the parents would actually come in from instead of like sitting in the lobby, they would come in and they would like watch as I would teach these kids music, because we were cracking up. We were having so much fun. I still to this day just like love sitting on the floor with a group of kids, just making them laugh and having fun. And so I realized like a lot of my background, like my father being a cantor, my music experiences, my Jewish knowledge, like all kind of were leading me in this direction in a very like kind of swimming with the stream, so to speak. It all felt like it felt aligned to just keep going in that direction. And so after school, I took a full-time job at the synagogue. And then I started writing more music. I eventually like pressured the cantor to buy this 8-track recorder. It was like a digital recorder where everything is. We weren't using the computers yet. It was just like we were plugging microphones in and plugging things in. And I was able to record a whole album of original music, and I got the cantor to sing and the kids choir to sing on it, and we got different people to sing and all these new songs that I was writing for the synagogue. And she was just so supportive. Every idea I came in, she was supportive of the idea. She helped me kind of tweak it and asked like, okay, well, what if this or what if that? And so she was really just like giving me a playground to explore and experiment and so that was like around the 2005, 2006 years.
Do you think anyone's vision as they were giving you all this stuff that they did want you, well, you're going to become a cantor or a rabbi? I mean, clearly.
I think that there was always that expectation or hope that I would go in that direction. And that was to them like the logical direction. And I think even for me, it was like I got to a certain point where I'm like, oh, maybe, I'm spending a lot of time in this world. Maybe I should go to, become clergy. And so that's when one of the things that prompted me to go to cantorial school or rabbinical school rather, was to kind of get that sort of clergy badge, whatever. Right. But yeah, my life took me in different directions. Ultimately, I knew I wanted to stay more on the artist side of the equation rather than the clergy person, which is really a service job. You're in service to people and to the community. And while I think that's really noble and beautiful work, that wasn't the parts of the work that I was getting moved by. And I always saw myself more as a composer, a writer, a performer, a teacher. And so it didn't make as much sense for me to continue on that path when I was on it. But yeah, I think I came to B'nai Yehuda in Kansas City in 2010 or 2011 for the first time. It was actually funny because they had hired Dan Nichols to come to come be there for the weekend, and
Okay.
for some reason he had to cancel, and so he was looking around for other people, and he reached out to someone else, and then that other person couldn't do it, and so then I was like their third or fourth choice, basically. I was I was like a young up and coming, I really hadn't been doing much of that sort of thing yet,
Right.
and so. Rabbi Art Nemitov, he gave me a call. He said, "Okay, can you come?" I went, and we had these beautiful conversations, and we explored and talked about like what the future of Jewish music is going to look like, what the future of the synagogue life is going to look like, what what prayer can look like in a congregation, and we started these like deep conversations, and that started I think it was a 7 or 8 year long relationship that I would go every year, several times a year, and we would experiment and explore and just like try different types of music, different styles of leadership, and he eventually had ideas for how to kind of transform their High Holy Day experience and the music of the High Holy Days, and so he commissioned me to write a bunch of music for that experience, to kind of rethink how the community was worshiping, and so. I think that the trust that he put in my hands, that Cantor Suffren put in my hands, that all these different figures became mentor figures for me to kind of play and experiment and explore. So that's kind of really where it got started.
Can I ask? So it started with your dad. Did your dad feel more like someone who was obsessed and focused on the words of the liturgy, or did it feel like it was a musical calling, like a religious musical calling? Did it feel like there were two paths, or like you can't view those as two paths, or like all intertwined?
I don't. It's definitely somewhere in the middle there, but I think my father, on that spectrum, he leaned more towards the side of like whatever is good for the community, and he wasn't as much of a stickler about the words and the liturgy and the tradition. He was actually a big innovator, and he really innovated in always. He was one of the first people to bring a guitar on the bima, and he had the first rock Shabbat service, and so he was really an innovator, and he was always trying to push things forward, and so that was the model for him, was just like how do we make the community, lift everybody up and move and push people forward. So I kind of grew up with that sort of type of leadership, and I actually, in many ways, I'm a little bit more conservative than my dad is, and Cantor Suffren also, like they were more progressive than I was in terms of the role of music, the traditions, and I'm like a little bit more reserved, I think, in that, and I learned from them just about like that it's important to push people forward and to move things in a forward direction.
How do you sit in the world? So it's funny. There was a cantor who used to be at B'nai Yehuda, and I remember her thing about traditional. People say stuff's traditional. They don't really, whether it's tradition or not, they just mean it's the song they were used to when they were a kid. So that's what tradition is. As you have explored Nusach and all the parts of, for hundreds, or trying to really study Jewish music in depth, do you, as you describe yourself a little more conservative, do you then try to bring those old things back, or do you try to rein in the new stuff, or do you feel like or do you feel much more like it's day to day, week to week? You don't have to follow a philosophy about how much this needs to stick to the text and the original intent. There's so much room for growth.
Yeah, I think part of not being a clergy person and not being a community leader gives me a lot more liberty, because I kind of just come in, I offer my offerings, and then I get to leave.
Right.
If I was serving a community on a weekly, daily basis, I probably would have a different set of opinions about it. But because that's not necessarily why I'm brought in. I'm not brought in to keep things the same. I'm brought in to try new things. And like, so I think there's if my role was different, I probably would I might be more conservative, I would say, in terms of my approach, because the day-to-day experience is a lot different than coming in for one night or one weekend and offering something.
How does, in the time, I feel like you've had experimental things. I mean, before we started this podcast, we were talking about a podcast you did for a period of time. I think you've done more, I don't know what to call it, like quicker music. So sort of like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make some music and I'm going to try to share it as quickly as I can during COVID, when we all had this time and musicians couldn't travel. Where are you right now in your musical travels? Do you feel like you're off are you studying Jewish stuff? Are you kind of looking to contemporary music? And what kind of stuff are you making right now?
I'm not specifically studying Jewish stuff at the moment. I think COVID was a big kind of it pulled me back a bit from like the trajectory that I had been on. I was like going full steam for several years, I would say 5 years of like really touring around and traveling to different communities. And then like 2020 hit and I was grounded for a while. And I think that it forced me to kind of reflect on like, what do I want to create for myself? And so I started I got some different pieces of music equipment, like a looper, which is like allows me to loop my voice over itself. And I started experimenting more with different music production elements on my computer. And I kind of started to like do a daily writing practice where I would kind of meditate, then I would breathe, and then I would start to sing and move my body and dance, and then create a beat, and then I would let that beat move into a piece of music, and then I would just kind of start to explore. And then every single day I was just writing and writing and writing these new ideas. They weren't actually like for anything. I had beforehand. I had been writing for a purpose. Like, I'm writing this piece of music because I know it's going to serve this community in this way. And it was like the first time that I had given myself permission to just write for the fun of writing for a while. And I realized that there was like this connection between my creativity and my spirituality, that like through breath and through movement, through dance, like that led to a vocal expression that led to ideas, and it just made me want to keep going and expressing. And so I actually wound up releasing an album last summer of a lot of these like vocal expressions that I had created. They were basically just.
Did you re-record them or keep the originals?
So a little bit of both. I kind of once I realized, oh, there's a project here, there's something going on here. Then I decided to then I realized what the scope of the project was, and I started to work to complete the album. And so, but what they started was just like, just ideas layering on top of ideas. And I realized what I was doing was, even though I play piano and guitar and I can do a lot of stuff on the computer, I was realizing that like my voice was the most like unique expression of myself. And so all of the ideas, I was singing them into the microphone and recording them and singing other things on top of them. And I was singing the drum parts and singing the bass lines and singing the horn parts and the guitar parts and singing all these different parts. And I was like, oh, well, what if the whole album was just vocal, like me just using my voice for all of the parts? And and so then once I realized, okay, that's a cool idea to just have everything be my voice, then I started kind of creating these pieces of music that were kind of like dance songs, but just for my voice. And so I called the album Move, MOVE, which is like obviously indicative of like movement, but also MOVE was an acronym for my own voice experiment. And so I was really excited by the idea of just like, I'm just going to use my voice, and whatever ideas come out, I'm going to follow them and create from that. Because when, I don't know if you play guitar, and if you're a pianist or guitar player, your hands kind of tend to go to the same places, and your fingers tend to like go to the chord positions that you're used to, and it's hard to like get something completely original, because you get stuck into whatever ability level you're at with your hands.
Right.
And so it was nice and freeing to like not have any instruments at all and just use the ideas that were coming out of my mouth. And like it felt very organic, and it felt like, stuff that I could move to, and it felt like a nice step forward for my creative practice.
So that was for your own personal creative practice. Was it, as somebody who gets paid to make art? So when you got this chance to, well, I'm not going to go do the normal thing I do to make a buck. So now I'm going to, there's this creative practice. Did you feel that yearning, the drive to, I got to make this pay, I got to figure out how to turn this into a thing? Or did you really want to kind of hold it as a bubble and say, no, this is going to be different. This is going to be just for me?
A little bit of both. I mean, it was like just a daily creative practice for me. And for a while, that was like, I would just do it just for the fun of doing it, because it felt good in my body. I felt good afterward. It really genuinely started, like it didn't start as like the project itself. I was using that as just like a way to get into a creative headspace, so then I could start writing things, right? But I didn't realize that like that was actually going to be the thing. And so, but obviously, like there's music and then there's music business, right? So the business of it is complicated. It was trying to figure out how to get people to listen to a thing, especially when everything's streaming for free, and you have like basically an ocean of music, and you put something out, and it basically is just like a drop in the ocean of everything else that's out there. And so it's hard to get people to listen to a thing. And I also found it challenging. I tried to do some performances of the music, but I found it like technically very challenging to perform it in a convincing way. Because like there's one thing where you just grab a guitar, I'm going to play some chords and sing the song. It's a lot harder when you have to build all of the pieces yourself with your voice and have it layered over itself. And there's a lot of like mapping out that has to happen. And I found myself like buried in my computer, as opposed to being able to actually interact with people, which is, to me, like I love when I'm performing, I want to be able to be interactive. And I felt I was like too concerned about like the different buttons I had to push. And it was like being like an old time, like, telephone operator, where you have to like plug this and unplug this and push this button, and everything had to happen at the right time. It was a little complicated to find a way to perform it effectively. But yeah, I'm not done with that project. I put it on pause, but I still found it very, there's something there that I'm still going to pursue for sure.
So given the fact that you could have just gone into regular music, or you could have just gone into theater, in the secular world, is it the early modeling and the early opportunities of Jewish music and kind of these role models along the way that you wanted to model yourself after, and they were making Jewish music? Did you ever at any point along the line want to be I want to go do the art, not Jewish art?
Yeah, for sure. That's always been in the background for me. I still struggle with that in a lot of ways. But and I've come to a point where I realize I can do both, and it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, where I can serve the Jewish community. And I have for the past 20 years, been serving the Jewish community. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I'm able to serve in that way. And also, if something comes out of me that doesn't feel like it's going to fit so neatly into that community, I can release that and do whatever I would want to do in that way, as well. So I don't feel necessarily bound, so strictly bound anymore. I think maybe I was putting that on myself a few years ago, that, okay, I'm a Jewish music artist and that means I have to do X, Y, or Z thing. I feel a little less bound to that these days. I'm actually doing a couple new things. I'm in an off-Broadway play right now, like a children's musical.
I think I saw. I think you shared some pictures of that. Yeah, it looks cool.
And so that was like a fun little divergent activity. It's no longer running, but but it was fun to do it in the month of December. And and I'm also working with some different people on writing theater, and so hopefully I'll be able to write a show this year and then be able to perform it and present it at some point, maybe the next year. And that, to me, I've written a lot of liturgy over the years. So to me, writing theater is a nice kind of next step where I can write things in English, and I can write things from a different vantage point that might still ultimately serve the Jewish community, but it also can kind of allow it to expand out of the Jewish community as well. A lot of the stuff that I've written over the last 20 years, like it serves the Jewish community well, but it doesn't have much place outside of the Jewish community. And I think that it's nice to be able to have something that I'm working on that has the potential to reach other listeners.
So this probably doesn't have a pat answer, but I'm wondering, you gave such a beautiful trajectory of your relationship with music for years. Could you maybe just talk a little bit, the other side, there's the musicianship of being a worship leader, and there's the musicianship of being a Jewish musician, and then there's the God liturgy part. And maybe if you could think about your evolution and your development in your relationship with God, and if that ever hit or diverged from the music. Like, I was doing music and God felt very far from it. And this other time I was doing music and I just felt like I was in line with the divine.
Yeah. I think, like most of us, I struggle with God and struggle with the God concept. I think that God is a human concept in a way, like that, like we created our personification of what we want that thing that's larger than ourselves to be. So then even the name God, the word that we're using, God, is like a human construction for a trying to explain a thing. And so I don't necessarily feel like I need to like say, okay, this name of God or this Hebrew prayer is magic or something. It's all just expressions of something that we're trying to explain that's larger than ourselves. And so I think religions are all beautiful in that attempt to try to explain that kind of universal power that feels larger than ourselves. And I am constantly in like in relationship with that entity, whether or not I'm aware of it or not. I do think that music is one of the best catalysts, though, for entering into that conversation with whatever that entity is. And so I think that's a big reason why religions and spiritual practices have used music to help us connect. Because I think that something happens to our brains and our bodies when we experience music. It puts us in alignment with something that we weren't in alignment with before. And so like the same thing with like tuning into breath, like when we phase in with music, it's just, it puts us more in alignment. And I think that's what I'm looking for, is like, there's moments when I feel out of alignment, and then moments when I feel in alignment or on the same frequency as whatever that thing is, that field of energy that is the field of potential and the field of like manifestation and the field of love and higher consciousness. All of those things feel like it's a frequency that I got to tap into. And so music has been a wonderful vehicle to get me to connect to that thing. And like the words, the Hebrew prayers, again, were written by humans that were trying to connect with that entity. And so the prayers, the words of the prayers are like the musical notes. It's just kind of an expression of something, but there's no reason why it can't. It doesn't mean that Hebrew prayers are somehow better than Christian prayers or Hindu prayers, or it's all just people putting their intention through words, because we're humans and we use language, and that's how we express these things. So it's like there's divinity, there could be divinity in all of it, as long as our intention is aligned with it somehow, and that the goal is to try to be in alignment with that entity. So that's how, maybe that's too lofty or long of an answer to your question, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Hebrew or Jewish for me to feel connected to it.
I did want to ask, though, I feel like as people's religious journeys, if they start on a particular path, or like my path, I was an atheist, I had no path, and wasn't particularly interested in religion. The particularity of this path, when you sit long enough with it and then you listen to other people from other faiths, I think I come to very much the same attitude you do, which is seems to be something universal about our experiences through history, throughout all these civilizations. There's something there that's, but then I struggle with the particular versus the universal. The universal sort of, if there's no particular, the universal has no flavor. It's like if we're all singing one song, it feels very boring. But then it's hard to be particular and then still be open-minded to universal, or vice versa. Some people are very universally minded and they find the particular very tribal and closed off. So how do you deal with that?
That's a beautiful, you explained it beautifully. That is the conflict. And I think in some ways Judaism's contribution to humanity, I think, is our ability to wrestle with contradictory beliefs, and that we're able to hold multiple opinions that seem to be contradictory from each other. And so in that way, it's not about a religion telling you to believe this, and now we all believe this, and if you don't believe this, then you're not on our team. It's right. I think part of Jewishness is like the ability to doubt, and putting that into the world, like the fact that like maybe millions of people might be going in this direction. I think Judaism's role is to be like, but maybe not. I don't know. But there's also this possibility. Who knows? And like our whole Talmud, the whole Talmudic system is like taking the Torah and piecing it and pulling it apart and saying, it says this, but does it really mean that? But it also could mean this, as opposed to the book that says, it says this, that means it means that, means you have to do this. I love the fact that it's like, we're just the religion of questions, not necessarily the religion of answers. And so that to me feels like freeing, but it also means it's not so surprising that there's a lot of Jews have moved towards Buddhism and mindfulness practices, because there's also like a relatively open-minded, perspective on spirituality. And it doesn't surprise me that, a lot of Jews go into comedy and satire. And so, and the arts and entertainment and writing and philosophy, because it's like all of these and like these things that ask big questions and are comfortable with the discomfort of those of the ambiguity of whatever that is.
Thinking along what people are trying to get out of music, I have found, you mentioned one of your best earlier experiences you had was with those young kids, K1, 2. There's something about doing music with kids where you can fully engage with them and everyone's fully engaged. It's, sometimes it can be boring because obviously when you're trying to teach Judaism to small children, it can't be as sophisticated as you're dealing with a 30-year-old. How, in your experience doing music and prayer, how does it feel different doing music and prayer with children? And how does it feel when you're doing music and prayer for the entire family or for adults only?
I'll say first that I think another reason why I backed away from being a clergy person is because I also think I had that same struggle with the universalistic versus the particularism, in the sense that like even when you said like teaching Judaism to children, because
I wanted to raise this,
something like got like triggered within me. I'm like, I don't want to teach Judaism to children. I want to just be around teach children something, or just be with them, because to me children are closer to source. And what I mean by that is like children are fewer years separated from from where we all began, and from where we're all going back to eventually. Like there's this beautiful story that I heard on a podcast. This Anglican priest named Father Richard Rohr, he's telling a story about how this couple comes into his office and they just had a newborn baby. They had a 3-year-old at home, and when they brought the newborn baby home, they the 3-year-old said, can I have a few minutes alone with my new baby brother? And the parents were like, not a little unsure, like, yeah, I don't know, you're 3 years old, maybe I shouldn't leave you alone. But they decided to like show her that they trusted her. And so they kind of stood behind the door, let the door crack open a little bit so they can listen into what she was saying. When the 3-year-old realized that she was alone with her baby brother, she said, quick, tell me, where did you come from? And she said, but then what she said next always raises like the hairs on my arm. She said, where did you come from? Because I'm starting to forget. And when she said, I'm starting to forget, it's like there's something there in that one statement that is it feels so true. It feels like there's a knowing that we were all part of this oneness at one point, that our souls were all connected, and that we were somehow deployed here on earth to be in this body, in this form, and then eventually that will go back to the universal, the consciousness, whatever our soul goes back to. So the children, to me, feels like they're closer to that place of like awe and wonder and curiosity and excitement and joy and lightness and play, which is where so much of our creativity and our spirituality can be born from. But over time, we get further and further separated from that source, and life happens, and sadness and grief and anger and all these things that come up in our life that force us to be more separate. And I feel like the spiritual journey is trying to close that gap and get closer and closer to that thing in this lifetime. So to me, being around children is like this beautiful reminder of that beauty and that oneness. And then being with adults, it's like, okay, how can we remind ourselves that we're separated from that thing, and how do we get closer to it?
That's funny, that trigger you had about that teaching Judaism, because it is what I wrestle with now. If I'm totally selfish and, asking you questions about this, when it shifts from the little kids where we're doing Jewish songs and teaching them a little bit of Hebrew, do you like the song? Right, that's God. Okay, we're having God right now. You like the song. And then when it gets older, like, oh, do you like God? Well, you need to know how to bow, and you need to know what the words mean, and you have to know what the theology is that the rabbis thought was important. Why is this prayer in this book? Because the rabbis thought it was important for this reason. You need to know that. And those things are so important, but I completely agree. It starts feeling like there's a fire and it's burning in the young age. And you feel like you're getting farther from the fire the more you fall into the theology and the trying to tell people what they're supposed to believe about God. A lot of religious education feels like you're telling little kids what they're supposed to believe about God.
Yeah, and we don't know the answer. That's the problem.
Right.
And so we go through the day to day, and we're like, oh, well, my curriculum says I have to teach this, and this is what happens in this time of year, and this is what we have to do, and we have to teach them the language. We have to teach them. I think we benefit from the fact that we're speaking a different language, and so we're able to just spend our time speaking about the mundane things, because very few of us are comfortable actually sitting down and having a theological conversation with a child. Very few of us are like that sure within ourselves of what we actually believe. And we're all, I think, a little bit uncomfortable trying to teach a kid about something that we're not so sure about. So it's a lot easier to okay, learn these prayers here, do these movements here. This is what this holiday means. This is what these words mean. Because it's a lot easier to just say, to kind of keep it in the mundane than it is actually to talk about the real thing. And so, yeah, it's again, another reason I never felt comfortable in with that aspect of the job. And so, yeah, and right now, because I'm a touring artist and I don't really have to do that to on a weekly basis, I can kind of stick with whatever I want to be talking about or teaching about, and I don't have the same obligations that I had when I was a religious school music teacher.
If you're out and doing music, you mentioned this one formative time where there were 200 plus adults and kids all singing together, and the power of that. I mean, that feels like power. That feels like assuredness. faith, trust, certainty that feels like just energy. We are pulling all in the same direction. And then the other side of that is what you're talking about before. Like, one of the discomforts about teaching this stuff is, well, I don't know for sure. I mean, I can tell you what rabbi said, or I can tell you what this cantor said, or I can tell you what our rabbi says. But for sure, I don't know. You kind of got to figure that out for yourself.
That's the thing is, like, so my goal then is create as many opportunities like that, like I had 20 years ago, is like the 200 people singing together at their full, with their full openness and their full heart. My goal is create as many opportunities like that as possible, so that people will remember that feeling of connectedness, that feeling of being together. And whether or not they decide to connect that to, oh, I feel that now I feel more connected to my Judaism, or I feel more connected to my community, or I feel more connected to something bigger than myself, or now I know how to listen to myself more deeply. That's really the goal. It's just like to have some sort of shift happen that teaches, that allows them an opportunity to experience that feeling. Whether it doesn't have to be Jewish or Christian or whatever the thing is, I just want to create more opportunities like that. That's my real purpose and my real goal. And so I grew up with the father who's a cantor, going to 12 years of Jewish day school. I studied at Hebrew college. I studied at, in Israel. I studied at Hadar for a year. I studied. So like, the language that is in me most fluidly is Hebrew and Jewish liturgy. And so that's the stuff, the vehicle that comes out of me most naturally. But it's not. I'm always cognizant of the fact that is not the answer in and of itself. That's just one expression of the thing that we're all trying to figure out and experience.
What did your family think of in your evolution, in your career evolution? Were they all? What do family and friends think about what you do, and how do they think about it back then? How do they think about it now? That's a big question. They probably have a lot of opinions, and you don't know all the opinions. Who knows?
Yeah. It's funny. I think that my father is probably more like me now. Like where he was, I think he probably also believed the same thing about, like, we're just trying to create a beautiful moment and a beautiful experience for people. But in my earlier years, I was more conservative. I went to a conservative day school. I studied in more conservative institutions than my dad had even studied in. And so I was fighting back in my adolescence and post-adolescence, which adolescence now bleeds way longer than it was. I was adolescent until yesterday, basically. But it's basically like the struggles I had with my dad was more like I was feeling more conservative. I was moving to the right on like, and at least not with politics, but with regards to like Jewish tradition and Jewish liturgy and stuff. But then I think the more I explore myself and explore my spirituality, the more open-minded I think I become about it all, and realize that, like, it doesn't matter what the words that we're saying are so much. I mean, I think that you can have a separate conversation about tradition and continuity, and we're one link in a chain, and if we don't pass on those traditions, then we're going to lose the thing. I think that's scarcity mindset. Ultimately, I think that's Jewish fear and Jewish constriction of, like, if you don't do this, then we're going to lose it. It's all on you to hold the Torah and to keep the tradition going. L'odor vador, and never break the chain of our people. And we've been saying these words this way for 2,000 years. And who are you to change them? That sort of mindset I'm becoming much less attached to.
But it is so powerful in so many synagogues and Jewish families. It's a fear that pulls the tradition along.
Exactly. But I don't want to be associated so much with a thing, with a fear-based mentality. I think that that's not the God that I pray to. That's making God in our image as opposed to us being made in God's image, right? When we stay so attached to, it has to be these words and it has to be this way, it has to be sung in this way and it has to be done because that's just what we do. That's a fear mindset. That's a fear-based, like, communication. And that's clearly not what Jesus was trying to express. That's not what the Bible was trying to express. It's not like, that's not the love-based communication that I ascribe to.
Yeah. Did you always feel comfortable working your way through the community, bucking that? Is this something you've come to now, or all your life you were a little off put by that? Because
Yeah.
so it manifests. So there's fears about a repeat anti-Semitism, there's fears about a repeat of genocide. And there's also fears assimilation. There's fears of assimilation, intermarriage and assimilation, these huge fears, and they never go away. You think they've forgotten, and a new year bubbles up and it's assimilation or anti-Semitism. These things have bubbled up again. People are afraid again. I'm more with you that, look, Judaism will survive because it's beautiful and wonderful and it will survive, right? Or it won't, but it won't be because I ran around scared and tried to, as you said, I made sure my chain was okay.
Yeah.
So we're good.
Yeah. It's fear. It's all fear. And we only have love and fear. That's the only two options we have. And it's a lot easier to choose fear. Fear is what most, things people are selling us. You need this because if you don't have this, then you're at a lack. Or you need to do this, or else the whole thing will crumble, or whatever. I know is that, like, time is an illusion. Like, all of these beliefs are an illusion. The traditions are an illusion. It's all being made up constantly anew all the time. It's being breathed through us today. Even the guys who live down the street. I live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which is like right down the street from the Satmar community, which is like the most right-wing Jewish that you can get. Even those guys, whether they believe it or not, are breathing their own modern 2023 versions of themselves into a tradition. And it's always evolving because we're always born anew in every moment. So yeah, if I have to choose, which luckily I get a chance to choose, I'm going to always try to make the choice that's based off of a love-based, communication rather than a fear-based. And so when I see the fear stuff popping up, the anti-Semitism stuff, it comes up with me too. It's not like it's not in me. I'm afraid of the movement of anti-Semitism that's happening right now. I'm afraid of, so many of losing traditions of all, but at the same time, we have to trust that there is something bigger than us that is wanting us to awaken and to express our humanity more deeply and more compassionately. And that can be done in a Jewish lens. It can be done in a Christian lens. It could be done, or none of it, or we just all, if we can all just like take them all away and just be humans together and expressions of God's love through human to human interaction, then we don't need any of those things anymore. We can just be, and then we'll be more like the animals. We'll be more like the birds that are just flying around. Like, they seem, when I see a squirrel running around, that squirrel seems pretty happy to me. It's just like going around doing its thing. It seems like it's a pretty happy being. We're the only ones who kind of really wrestle with it.
So kind of the return to the Garden of Eden sounds.
Yeah, exactly. Before we ate the apple.
I want to ask you one last question. And just because I was talking to my mentor, she is working on helping people in corporations give better feedback. Because generally in corporations, people say feedback is fraught. Either people give negative feedback and it really hurts, or they give sort of meaningless positive feedback. You're great. But people do say they want kind of effective feedback. As you think back in your music career, is there something that jumps to mind, like one piece of just feedback that jumps, not just a compliment that someone comes to you and gives you a hug and says, you are great, but they give you a piece of feedback that opens your eyes to something about your music or about yourself or about, wow, you're right, that is great. Or they corrected, you're right, that did need to be fixed. Is there a piece of feedback in your music career that jumps out at you?
Yeah, I'll say on both sides of that. There's the constructive criticism that I got, and then also like the positive feedback that I got on two separate occasions. On the constructive side, early on, I did a service at a synagogue in New York, and after the service, the rabbi wrote me this really long email, which was mostly positive. It was mostly constructive. But one of the things he said was, we asked you to have the service be 1 hour long, and you went over to about 1 hour and a half or 1 hour and 45 minutes.
Okay.
And I, you know, I was not at the time. I was like, oh, well, that's just because it was a fun evening and we were having a good time. Wasn't everyone having a good time? And I realize now that that like when you say something's going to be an hour, it's respecting people. It's respecting people's time. It's respecting the time and the commitment that people have come from their home to be here with the community for this allotted time. And they have lives and they have, community that they want to be with as well, and plans and such. And, how do you, if you're given an hour to do a thing, then find a way to make that whatever experience that you're going to create, make it be that exact amount of time, out of respect for the people who are there. And if you can't get to that level of like awe in that 1 hour, and like that's on you, because you haven't hit your marks, not because the community hasn't responded in a certain way,
Right.
And it's also a little selfish. It's self-indulgent when you keep going and going and going over your time that you're given. It's because you're getting fed by the attention or whatever it is that and you love being up there, but you can't speak for every single person in that room, and you have to respect other people as well. So that was a really important piece of feedback. So now whatever I'm doing, I keep a clock on the Bima or on my music stand with me, and I see the time very big and bold on whenever I'm doing a concert, whenever I'm doing a service. I see the time and the clock, and so if I have to make adjustments and cut, I know where I am. And then if if we're 10 minutes or 5 minutes before, someone might, the rabbi or someone might come up to me like, it's okay if you go over, it's fine. But I know that I'm going to be sticking to if they have me for an hour, I'm doing an hour. Not because like, I said, I only said I'm doing an hour. And so you only
paid me for 60
you only
minutes.
paid me for an hour. And so no, I'd be happy to go for 2 hours. I love the attention, but it's not that. It's actually out of respect for the people who arrived, and who are there. And so that was a really important piece of feedback that I got early on. And then another one that kind of seems like it wouldn't be constructive, but it was very, very nice in a way. Someone last year, he was a choir director in San Francisco, and he was like the music director for that evening. We had a choir, we had a band. It was like this big service. And afterwards, he said to me, "You've got a really healthy ego, or a big healthy ego." And like at first I was like, oh no, what does that mean? What does he mean by that? But what he meant by that, and what I asked him and he explained, but what I've come to learn is that when you're in a position of leadership, if you're not leading with confidence and if you're not commanding in a way, then you're not necessarily doing your job. Right? If you're up there and you're kind of not sure what the next steps are, and you're asking, what should I do? And you're not sure what you should ask the congregation to do. And hey, maybe can you try singing this? If you're not like strong and confident in your leadership, you're not actually doing anybody a service, right? That's actually an expression of your ego being small, being weak, not small, but being fragile. Because like you're not sure if you should say something or do something, but so being able to stand and have a commanding presence, but then when he said, but a healthy one is not taking command, not demanding that people come along, but having it healthy enough that you actually in some ways kind of lose your ego in that moment. You know what your purpose is. You're serving a moment. My purpose in this moment is to be a leader, and this is what a leader does. Not because I'm taking it because my ego needs it, but because this is what my role is in this moment. And so again, if I'm not stepping into that role as a leader, I'm not doing that job properly. So it feels like you're being egotistical. It feels like you're taking control of everything. But if you're able to do that where everyone up there with you knows where to go, all the musicians and the choir and the band, everyone knows what direction we're heading. The congregation feels like you're leading them in a direction. Then we can all, like with love, get risen even higher, and like it raises the temperature of the entire room in a beautiful way. That doesn't have to be done by force. That can be done in the most loving and compassionate way, where everyone feels good following with someone that they trust, that they trust where that person wants to lead. And it's not because that person is doing it because they need it for themselves, but it's like, this is what's right for the moment. So that was a really important piece of feedback. And it was nice when I finally understood what he meant. I thought it was nice.